Steve, a pleasure, first of all, to meet you finally. We've been interacting on the Facebook groups, and but never actually face to face. So
True.
that's already fun. That's already great.
It's nice to
Uh,
meet you as well.
Thank you. And one of the things that I learned about you through my personal um, kind of investigation and to the conversations I had with people around the community is that, how should I put it? The guy who saved the EVI.
That's funny.
Um,
I guess there's certainly a story there.
yeah,
There's a
so,
story about that. I don't know if I think saving the EVI is a community effort, but I think probably was catalytic. I think
mm,
I was I'm the type I prod and I like to start fires when I think there's a need. So I think my role's been largely catalytic in many of these things. And I'm just really lucky to work or to meet really talented people that can make things happen.
great. I heard that you work closely with Berglund Instruments, with Johan Berglund.
I did.
And I guess this has to do as well with this initiative you took with making new EVIs or promoting the EVI again, or making or creating more interest in the EVI again. So maybe you can kind of give me a timeline or like how it all started and where it comes from. And I'm super curious to know.
Well, sure. I mean, going back, I got into EVI back in about 1984. So
Mm-hmm.
I was a student at the University of Missouri. That's out in the Midwest. It's a state
Mm-hmm.
few Europeans can probably visit. They fly over. Um, and I was also went to the University of Iowa where I was in the jazz band, I'd started in '84. I got a call from my trumpet repair guy, and he's like, I got this something you got to see. So I go over, and I'm like, all right, I got to see this, and there's a Krumar, an old Krumar EVI, and I'm like, oh wow, that's really interesting. And at the time I was a pretty serious trumpet player and pretty well known local trumpet player in the Midwest, and I was playing with lots of bands and one band in particular, a blues band, where we were sort of doing the blues belt. But I looked at this thing and I'm like, I'd love to get into like electronic. My guitar player in the band had just gotten one of those Roland guitar synthesizers, and so I thought, and he was doing some really cool things with it, and I decided, yeah, let me check it out. And I didn't know what I was doing at all, so I sort of dove right in. And there's so much later on I realized I didn't know. I didn't know a thing about electronics or synths or amplification or all these things I know now. So it was all trial and error. And of course, this was like pre-internet, at the time. So there's not much out there. It was a pretty isolated thing to do, is get involved in these things. This is back when things were done largely by email or mail. So I got this thing and started playing it. And my first outing, when I first played it out, it was disastrous, just because I probably, I hadn't spent enough time with it. And like one person in the band was like, "Oh man, no, don't use that." But another guy in the band was the guy who had the guitar synth, who was the leader of the band. He's like, "No, stick with it." He goes, "That's really cool." And so I got encouragement there. And from there, I went to, like, in college, when I went to the University of Iowa, they even started writing compositions for it, because they're like, yeah, that's really cool. It was like Iowa at the time was this sort of, they were into free jazz and experimental stuff. So I started getting more use of it then, but I was still largely a trumpet player. Um, and from there, after college, I took it with me. I moved to Washington, D.C. from, have you ever been to Washington, D.C.?
No, I've been to I think
New
the
York?
northest, New York, Philadelphia,
Oh, Philadelphia, wow.
and yeah, I studied in Philadelphia actually.
Hmm.
I went to Temple University for one semester as an exchange student,
Wow.
and I studied with John Swana.
Did you?
I did.
Oh, see,
It was not my main teacher. I was still very much focused on saxophone, but
one of the great EVI players and a
right.
great trumpet player, obviously. So yeah, I've actually tracked Swana. Swana's amazing, amazing musician.
One of a kind.
Yeah, amazing guy. So yeah, I ended up in DC, and DC was a great place to be. And I just started playing. I got the first thing. What do you do what does a musician do when you move to a new town? You immediately start going to jam sessions, right? To hook up with musicians. And so I started doing that. And then I ended up starting a jazz quartet for a while. And we had a house gig on Capitol Hill. And then I ended up playing jam sessions off of this 14th Street corridor. This was before it was revitalized. And these were gigs like that would go from 9 at night till 4 in the morning. It was one of those things. And we were kind of like the house band, and people would come and play. It was a really great scene. But I started realizing trumpet's a hard instrument. Trumpet is extremely physical. And I mean, really, these trumpet players I liken them to, they're like athletes. The amount of the work that it takes. Like if you look at guys like Sam Zambito, who play trumpet, and others, the keeping your embouchure, just the amount of time it takes to physically be able to play trumpet is a really high level. And it is for all instruments, but my sense is trumpet's very physical. It's very hard to maintain it. So I started realizing that, I was sort of shifting over from trumpet a bit, and I was playing more and more EVI. And as I got more gigs and started working with other bands, they were really liking the EVI. Now, jazz people at these jams didn't like it. It was sort of at a time. This was around the time that the neocon jazz movement. Remember that movement where it was like all of a sudden, like silver plating was bad, and you wanted your trumpet to look like you pulled it out of a paper bag, or a tarnished brass. Everything was traditional, and everybody was moving back to this sort of neoconservative movement of old New Orleans historical sort of jazz, and old Dixieland and other traditional jazz types, and sort of fusion. It was like this anti-fusion and anti-electric movement, and people were taking the plating off their horns. Bass players couldn't play their Fender Jazz anymore. They had to get it upright. It was that kind of time. And so the jazz crowd was a bit hostile toward the EVI, but there were still a lot of open-minded jazz players too. So I just sort of kept with it, but I ended sort of moving into the R&B side, which is they really welcomed it more than the jazz side. The jazz, and that's partly, I don't blame the jazz side. The jazz side wanted a certain sound, and probably my sound wasn't there, and the technology wasn't there yet. And and it's also the optics of an EVI at the time would have been odd for a traditional jazz type of setting. So I played both, but I found myself getting the gigs I was getting paid to do. And I'm, largely my gigs, I'm a bar guy. So, I like playing bars, and I like playing clubs and parties and festivals. That's really what I do, because it's fun. And most of my scene was entertaining people who were drinking beer, eating, or having cocktails, stuff like that, party situations. And I've just found at one point, they're like, just bring your EVI, and I was thinking about quitting trumpet. And I was like, it was really hard decision, because you put so much work into trumpet. But I also was at a point where I was I felt the possibilities of the EVI were so great that I had to dedicate myself to it. I had a time issue too. Is first of all, most of my gigs I was doing on EVI and I was finding I was getting more gigs on EVI than trumpet. Much less competition. There's a lot of more trumpet players than there were EVI too. But I just found I could do so much more, and the length of the gigs I had to play, which were pretty long, the endurance factor, and unless you can really keep up that embouchure on trumpet, it's just a lot. It's a time. It's not something you can do in an apartment in the big city, right? In Amsterdam, even you can't just be blaring on your saxophone.
Most definitely not. No.
24/7, and with the neighbor not knocking on your door at some point. So sure. There's that too. There's that aspect of of the benefits of it. So I dropped the trumpet at 95, around 95. And I went exclusively EVI, and that's something I don't really regret, although I do miss trumpet, and I have the highest respect for those that play trumpet, like Brad Mason, and again, Sam and others who still play trumpet. But it was just a decision I made because that's kind of where my gig life took me. And then I ended up sort of with soul bands, and at one point I had a house gig down at the beach for 20 years. Just playing almost every week, and it was just a great experience. So that's kind of what led me to sort of into EVI. So as time goes by, let's move forward now to roughly 2017, right?
Yeah.
So 2017, and I'm sitting around with my aged MIDI EVIs and my old Krumar and my old EVI 1000, EWV 2000, great unit, by the way.
I know.
And I'm seeing woodwind controller after woodwind controller come out. I'm like, well, that's interesting. The EVI has been forgotten. We had one run with the EVI 1000 and Akai. The only other options you have are really Krumar, an old Krumar, if you can find one. Now they're super rare. Wasn't that many of them made.
Or maybe the 4000 with the EVI fingerings.
The 4000, well, that to me that's a Armageddon scenario. That's apocalypse scenario for an EVI player. To me, we'll talk about that in a second, but the rekeyed woodwind option is just not a good option for an EVI player, or at least me as an EVI player. Some people adapt to it really well. And, at the time with the EVI being really threatened with extinction, it's not a bad thing to have, but once you play an EVI, which is a really well-designed instrument, you don't want to go back because there's a certain Steiner did some amazing things. I mean, the design that he did is really comfortable in terms of how you hold it. The octave and fourth mechanism is really very easy and very balanced, and it has a very good feel, the closest feel to a trumpet that I kind of felt, because trumpet players typically don't use their left hand, right? Their left hand is pretty much it's either holding the horn, or it's doing something with the mute. So the canister is kind of like, could feel like a mute, a wah mute. So it's a very native feel with the EVI. But I just couldn't see, I had tried other controllers, like, I don't know if you recall, do you remember the MDT that came out? That thing that was like a two-dimensional trumpet?
Yeah.
So that was cool.
I saw it. I have no idea about it.
It was an odd, well-made control for sure. I met the guy who made it. He came to New York, and really nice guy. And it was beautiful. It had valves. I mean, it was very much like a trumpet. It even looked like a trumpet. It was 2D with glowing blue. But the fatal thing for me was the octaves and the fourths. And if you don't have that right, that has to be effortless. Now, some people could probably adapt to it. I couldn't get, it was a sort of side thing, and it was very hard on the hand. And if you're used to just effortless octaves and fourths, it's very hard to switch to something. Even to me, even holding an EWI rekeyed it's a balancing act. You need a neck strap, and it's a bit of an odd feeling. It's doable. I could get by on it with practice, but it's not something I really wanted. And I also felt the EVI is a beautiful instrument. Steiner put a lot of work into that design, and that's a long design, and it's well tested with a good amount of players. I mean, the EVI is still largely, it's an orphan instrument. There's not that many EVI players, right? But
no. Less than
but
EVI players for sure, yeah.
There's a lot more EVI players. But if you look at the history of wind controllers, the EVI has been pretty impactful, and EVI players have been impactful. For instance, an EVI player invented the EWI. If you look at it, it was a trumpet player that invented the EWI.
That's true.
And he was an EVI player.
True.
Recker got his start with the help of an EVI player, Judd Miller, who you interviewed.
Correct.
In one of your, and that was a great interview, by the way. All your interviews are really good, but that was a really interesting one because I know he was a very early player, and he's a nice guy too. And then many of the top sound designers and patch designers are EVI players, like are EVI players, excuse me, like Mark Steiner, even Johan Berglund, who I consider, or Ewan Berglund, sorry, the correct pronunciation. Ewan I consider him an EVI player now. And Matt Traum, a longtime sound designer. So the EVI players are pretty active in our industry and doing some cool things. But so here I am looking at all these woodwind controllers come out. Let's see, we see the Silphio, and there's the Rolands, 3 Rolands now. There's like an EWI-4 at the EWI 5000 level. It's like, and here we are. And then, so as an EVI player, I'm like, I'm feeling pretty disenfranchised. And I'm like, and I'm looking at my Steiner MIDI EVI, it's getting old. And I think to myself, what happens if this breaks? What do I do? So what are my options? Well, my option is get it repaired, and that's not inexpensive. It's pretty costly, and there's not many people that can repair it. The other option is to switch over to a woodwind style and use an EVI fingering, and that's not appealing to me. I don't want to give up all this investment I put into in the EVI. I mean, imagine what if they stopped making saxophones one day and said, you need to play a valve trombone, instead. We'll key it like a sax, but you'll have to switch. I wouldn't fly with you. So, you'll just have to live with it. Imagine that scenario. No, so that's not something I really wanted to accept. So around July 2nd, actually it was on July 2nd, 2017, I was in a forum, in one of the wind controller forums. I just put it out there. I was like, listen, the EVI is endangered. It's, Nile's not building them anymore. I know because I tried. I talked to Nile. He wasn't making them. He said there was nobody making the EVI. There was no new EVIs that I was aware of that could be easily obtained. I don't blame Nile. Nile's paid his dues, and he made a ton of these things for us. He supported. It's not incumbent on Nile to save the EVI. He invented it. He created this wonderful instrument. It's incumbent on EVI players to keep this instrument alive, because he's, but the work that goes into creating these things is surprising. There's a surprising level of complexity. It's not that easy. So around July 2nd, right before the 4th of July, 2 days before the 4th of July in 2017, I sort of put it out there. I'm kind of exasperated. I'm like, there's, I think another all these controllers, but there was nothing for us EVI players. And I decided to sort of put it out there and see what the response is that I get. And this is not just, I just didn't do this out of the blue. I had contacted manufacturers. I had contacted other controller makers I had done a ton of work and attempted to lobby. No one was interested in making an EVI. They either want to do some like new type of controller, but no one wanted to preserve this sort of beautiful instrument and make it and keep it alive. And I don't want to list I don't want to list the companies that I contacted, just because that's sort of a private business thing, but none of them were interested. They didn't see the market size, and that's understandable, because I think there is a bit of a big learning curve coming over from trumpet. I know that coming over from trumpet to wind controller is not an easy thing, because I think it's the nature of the trumpet. And I can see it being very easy. Trumpet players liking the idea, but then getting it and then realizing that there's a big sort of learning curve, and that being and sort of it being really foreign at that point. And I felt that. I remember going through that with the Krumar. I'm like, oh my God, this is nothing like trumpet. I thought this was a brass style controller. Well, it turns out the most of the brass style is in those three little keys. And that's about it. So you have to learn everything from scratch, which is how to play it, how to blow the horn, how to do the octaves and the fourths. And then you sort of have to disconnect or unlearn what you know about trumpet and then relearn or learn about EVI and how to play EVI. So it's like learning another instrument. Your trumpet background helps a little because your trumpet background has taught you music, and the fingerings help a little bit, but there's a learning curve. So it's not that easy. So the market was really small and controller makers simply weren't interested in making it. Whereas I think for woodwind players, going over from a woodwind to an EWI, for instance, is maybe much easier. What was your experience like? Did you find it easy, or was it a high learning curve for you?
Personally, personally, it went pretty fast for me. But I think it also has to do with the fact that since a very young age, I was into electronics. So for me, it's like I wanted to play this instrument. I think that it's a different thing when you just pick it up and try it, or if you just want to play it.
That's true.
So for me, it went pretty fast. I guess within a year, maybe a bit more than a year, I could already kind of control it and have a good basic control with it. But I spent that year on a daily basis to just develop skills, so I could play it the way that I wanted. And then, of course, by now it's been 15 years. So
yeah, you're a hell of a player, man. I watch your videos. You're like, you kill on it.
Thank you.
I love watching all you guys, what you're doing. It's so different from when I started, but to see what you and others are doing, like what you did, some of the things you did with EVI-NER was really amazing. I was like, wow. I mean, how you got your own sound with it was really cool. Yeah. But it's really interesting to see how, I think that's a part of the story, is that the switch over from brass to EVI it's a different experience than the switch over from woodwind to EWI, for instance. Yeah. Woodwind, there seems to be an easier learning curve for some reason.
Yes, true. But I can also mention that I know that some players, for example, I teach EWI. I teach it in a conservatory. I give a skills class for it. And some students have it easier, some students don't.
You're right. I think some people do have a natural affinity to it.
I guess.
I had an affinity to EVI, and I was able to sort of disconnect from trumpet. I think there's a paradigm shift when you play, like when you switch from your, like say your sax to your EWI, or my trumpet to EVI, you have to be able to like understand the paradigm shift. And if you do, I think then it goes better. But for some that can't, and I see new EVI players getting now with the new EVI, available new EVI players, new EVI players. They struggle with it too, but now we have a community of people to help teach, and hopefully, grow the ranks of EVI. But when did you feel how long did it take you to feel you could go out on the gig and play your EWI?
Funny enough, now that I think about it, the first time that I actually stood on stage with a wind controller was with the WX11.
Actually, it was actually really simple to use. The WX7 people didn't like it as much, but the WX11 was actually a really very straightforward, easy to play instrument. It was actually well designed.
I guess. I play that. And it's not that I had any issue with it or something, but it's just that, when I got the EWI under my hands, that I understood actually what it's like. Okay, now this is for me. this is really for me. And I was very lucky actually also to study with a person, which is also somebody that you know, Eli Benokot. He also did some testing for EVI-NER.
Oh man.
And this guy basically is a person which I call him basically my musical guru. He really taught me, and he taught me EVI. He taught me the whole everything from top to bottom without even teaching me EVI. It's like I came to the lessons and I was still on saxophone, but he already made the switch to EVI, and he was playing EVI, and I was playing saxophone, and that kind of went for a couple of years back and forth, up to a certain point when I decided, you know what, it's time for me also to, you know, to start digging into this, because this is really, really interesting. And basically everything that I kind of got from him, absorbed from him, I took and went to, you know, took it with the EVI and went my own way.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think that Eli's amazing. Actually, he did work on the EVI-NER, and
yeah,
man, his articulation is just insane.
Correct.
I was like
100%. The articulation
like,
this guy has is incredible. Yeah, I know.
Like, that demo he did.
I know.
That blew my mind. I was like,
not only yours.
Guys, like I have a EVI players group on Facebook. I think the largest EVI players group on Facebook, and posted that, and they were like, I think their jaws just dropped. They're like, oh my God, that articulation that he, you know, and it's great. It's great when to hear someone do that on like a project that you worked on.
Correct.
So it's really amazing everything that happened there. But back to, I think, the new EVI. So I put this out there. I'm like, we got to save the EVI. We're endangered species. EVI players are going to die out, right? So, you know, the only way to get an EVI is either buy a used one from someone who sells it, or you die. Someone dies and you get their EVI. Like that's how bad it was. And the price of the EVI was going up to like $2,000 or more, right? I think the starting price when Nile made them, they were $750. And it took half a year or to a year or more, depending on when you ordered and who you knew. So, you know, and I tried to call Nile, and Nile just wasn't interested at that point. And we were all kind of waiting. We're all kind of waiting on Nile, which is unfair. I think that's patently unfair, but we were all waiting and hoping Nile was going to come out with new Arduino, an Arduino EVI, right? And that just doesn't happen. He's at that point in his life. He wants to do other things. He made like hundreds of EVIs. He supported, you know, he did his job, and he's probably not motivated to produce EVIs because they're hard to make. So I put this out there, and I get hardly any response on this forum, this wind controller forum. But I do get some people that pay attention to it. One of them was James Ingenito. You might know him. James, a very talented trumpet and EVI player. Great guy. And so he immediately contacts me. He's like, I'm 100% in, I'll help. And James turned out to be instrumental in helping with the new EVI. And he's a great guy. And we did testing, and I owe him a great debt. And he's also just a fantastic player. And I love hearing him. And I love what he does with EVI. So, and another guy, I think Blake Foster, showed support. And then I do more research, and I find out there's this guy a guy out of Sweden, making these sort of wind controllers with the teensy technology. And his name's Ewan Berglund. And so I contact him, and I'm like, well, I go, let me see what he says. And I struck up a conversation with Ewan, and I sort of tell him the plight. I ask him first if I could, you know, I'm going to try to make one myself. The first idea was to do it myself. You know, I got to, you know, find out, see if we can, if I can make my own. And he was very supportive. And I asked if I could use his software. He's like, of course you can. You know, Ewan is a completely sort of open source, very free guy. And he had no problem sharing all his findings. And he was just very generous with his time, his advice, really nice guy. And then the more we talk, the more I'm explaining to him like the plight of the EVI and how, like, and I tell him about the inventor, and he's like, he goes, that's something I could get, saving that instrument is something, a worthy cause. He felt it was a worthy cause. And he's like, that's something I can get behind, and I'll help you. And I'll help, and I'm like, this is great. So we start working together. And he's like, I'll just, I'll tell you what, I'll modify the software to work, do EVI fingerings. And he's like, and he starts taking on these things. And I'm like, wow, and I start to realize this guy has got incredible skills, and he's incredibly talented in a number of areas that are sort of key to becoming a maker in this space. And as I learn more about him, he's not just a tinkerer. He's like, he does stuff at the component level. So we start working together, and we make a little prototype. So this is one of the early prototypes, right?
Oh, wow.
So you can see, this is just a test one. This is just what we call a proof of concept. I use an old plumbing end cap here, right? And it's a simple, this is sort of and you can see how I used weather stripping for the benders. It's got a hole, and it's got a mouthpiece. And we start building, and eventually it's sort of, as it goes on, he takes more and more of this stuff on. He's getting really interested in it. And it turns out he's like, I look at what he makes compared to what I make. And I was sort of resigned to being like, I'm going to have to learn all this. I'll probably learn to have to fabricate. There's a lot of work that goes into making it. You have to fabricate the body. You have to do but he has all these skills where he can make the boards. He was able to print, sort of have boards made. He understood the coding, the micro component level. He happened to be, he's really good at soldering. So he sort of starts taking this on more and more. And then we both realized, making a kit is not going to be enough. And he's like, it's probably, what people really want is they want EVIs. They want a maker. And that's where he steps in. And we were just super lucky that Ewan stepped up and decided to make these and take on this project. And then he sort of gets into it and becomes an EVI player, and he plays other things as well. But he makes these what he came up with was quite amazing. The EVI that he made is just beautiful. It's one of the, it brings in new things like color options. It had an OLED screen, which, so no more like blind menu diving. That was sort of characteristic of the Nile Steiner MIDI EVIs at the time. It wasn't hard, but the more blind you dive into with configurations, it's very hard. But the OLED sort of takes all that away. So we added all these new features. And as we're building that, and James is working with us, and Ewan is sort of, people start contacting us, whereas before there wasn't much interest, and a lot of people were asking me like, well, what does Niall think? And my thought was that Niall probably would like his instrument to live on after, years from now, and to sort of like a Bach Stradivarius trumpet or a Selmer saxophone, right? You want good instruments to live and sort of carry on. And so we start plowing away, and I can say right now is that Ewan could have done all this himself. He has the skills to do everything. So what I decided is, he can do it. He wants to do it. I'm going to help him. So we sort of work together and identify the parts. We do, James and I do measurements, and then I start speccing out components, and how to make the mouthpieces. And it's a convoluted process, which is a testament to Niall's genius, which is how he came up with all this stuff through experimentation over the years. But it's a lot of work. So I tried to make it easy as possible, or tried to assist Ewan as much as I could by helping him and giving him as much information and giving him options, sourcing parts. And we talked at one point about printing, 3D printing, and that came to be a reality. And he 3D prints a lot of things now. But so at the end of it all, I did my best and I think I got him. We got it. My goal was to get a maker. At some point we needed the only way for the EVI to survive is to have someone making EVIs and have people playing EVIs. If you don't have those two things, the instrument's not going to survive. So here we are, today, and we're now on, that was back in 2017, so almost 4 years ago is when it first started. And then I think it took about roughly it was sometime in 2018, we really got that thing up and running fast. And at this point, now people are sort of taking it seriously, and they're like, well, yeah, tell us more about it. Oh, a new EVI, this is great, all of a sudden. And so I'm talking to players and they're really interested in it. And then people, what was surprising was that when I reached out to some people, there wasn't a lot of interest. It was kind of interesting. There was the people I think the people I thought would have been really invested in it weren't so much. And some people, and for understandable reasons, had their skin in different games, such as woodwind controllers, and just making rekeying woodwind controllers, which is, again, a great option, but it's not an EVI. It's better. To me, it's a better than nothing option. Right. Like if there's no EVIs, if the EVI goes extinct, it's better than nothing, and it's something you'd have to adapt to. But saving the EVI took a lot of work in terms of a bunch of people coming together and being willing to value it as an instrument and then do something about it. And then that's really where you and Berglund Instruments sort of came out as a result of that. And so he starts this business, and I still work with him and on some like supply stuff. But I help people to once it's in production. The first thing I do when I work with these types of people who are willing to do things for the community is I tell them up front, I'm not trying to get in their pocket. I'm not doing this for money, or to try to make money off of it. I was doing it because I wanted to keep playing the EVI and have access to newer instruments with newer features. And so one thing, like when I work with individuals, like I tell them, I don't want your money. Because money is always like the thing that mucks things up, is usually money. And he's doing all the work. He's investing in all the parts, all the components. He's putting out all the outlay. So I'm going to support him, but I don't need to be I don't need to be like expect compensation. My compensation is seeing the instrument survive. So once that's out of the way, and when the money goes out of the way, it's you see things move a lot quicker, and then you donate your time, and you're able to get an instrument out to players. And so we did fairly quickly at a point in development around 2000, I think it was early 2018, we sort of connect as we're trying to figure out the critical components, like the vibrato lever of the EVI, which is critical, and some other things. We hook up with Mark Steiner, and who reaches out to us, and he's kind of instrumental in the new EVI as well, because he was sort of the connection to Nile. If you want to, Nile is hard to get a hold of traditionally, and because he's probably down in the basement lab tinkering, dropping salt water on aluminum and then seeing how it sounds.
Actually, I have an interview ready to be published with him, hopefully this week.
Can't wait to hear it. He's fascinating.
Yeah, and he's exactly as you said, he was he's down in the basement printing some 3D stuff. I'm not sure what, I heard a lot of machines behind him all the time, and
he may get back into it. Who knows?
Well, let me surprise you and tell you that he does.
Yeah.
He's making new EVIs and new EWIs as well.
That's great to hear. Yeah. The more the merrier.
Exactly.
To me, it's not about, I would love to see like the Silphio people making EVIs. I would love to see Roland making an EVI. They're not gonna, but Silphio might do something like that. But the rekeyed thing's not gonna cut it. Make an EVI. It's an actual instrument. There's more than one saxophone maker. It's like there's different kinds of
Absolutely.
saxophone makers. There's different kinds of trumpet makers. And if you look, like even that area sort of changed. Like you see Monet trumpets and these super designer boutique saxophones coming out that are amazing. But I'm glad to hear he's getting back involved in it. That's really good to hear. I'll support that as well. But he's the kind of guy that can do that.
True.
And
Yeah.
but either way, we were at a situation where there was nothing going on. But Mark was really helpful. Mark is a really talented, interesting guy and a talented musician, really good, knowledgeable in the analog synthesis area. I saw that interview you did with him. He's an amazing guy, really nice guy too. And he's just a delight to work with. And he and Ewan have a shared affinity with the analog stuff. And they work really well together. But he kind of connected us with Niall, and then Niall kind of got involved and totally supported the idea, and was there to sort of to assist and cheer on the whole new EVI development. So he was very much on board with it and happy that the EVI was continuing.
Yeah, there are already some videos out there on YouTube from Mark's channel that are playing all these on these really small wooden like looking kind of boxes.
Yeah, it looks like a little piano.
Right.
Looks like a little, but the wooden EVI. It's funny, the wooden ones. I once asked him about wood. I said, "What do you think about wood?" And he was, and I was like, "I'd never used wood." He was like, "That they're terrible insulators." And then later he makes a wooden one. Maybe he changed his mind. But I think wood's beautiful.
Who knows? Yeah.
Wood's a beautiful instrument material. But at the time, he thought he was really more into plastics. But I've seen those little sort of EVIs, the canisterless things. I personally like the traditional EVI to me, the canister feel is a supportive thing. And just the feel of rotating the canister and then using your index finger around the sort of circumference is really native to me. But he's doing I'm really happy to see that he's doing experimentation and sort of pushing the EVI designs. So there's a lot left in the basement there for Niall in terms of development. So I'm really happy about that. And I wish him well, and I'll support, hopefully, depending on what comes out, I'll hope to support that as well. Although I have to say I'm really happy with Berglund Instruments. The quality, the reliability, the features for what the price point is really good. So we're in good hands. That said, it's the more the merrier in this field. The more EVIs being made, the better it is for all of us. There's a lot of guys interested. I think we're in a golden age of wind controller right now.
Exactly what I wanted to say. You just took the words out of my mouth.
It's if you look at, we got people like you and like Kurt Sipe and Bernie and others like teaching EWI and bringing it into academia. We have makers like Rudy, who's working on that really cool mouthpiece. I think Rudy, by the way, is an amazing citizen, wind controller citizen. He's doing some really cool stuff. Working on the new photon mouthpiece, and of course Respiro is amazing. Is amazing piece of PM software. So I try to support. I want to support people who support the community, and these guys clearly are engaged with their customers. They're open, they're transparent about what they are doing and not doing, and they work with the community to get things done. It's not a secret what they're doing, and that, to me, those are the type of people who are engaged. Silphio looks like I'm pleased to see other players like Silphio and or is it Silphio? I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but
as far as I know, Silphio, but I may be
Silphio.
wrong.
It looks interesting, and then of course the new Roland AE30 looks really. It's an interesting new. I think it's great. I mean, this is we couldn't be better off today a big thanks. I think we owe people like Michael Brecker, who was probably the king of all Windsynth players. To me, he was the most influential. Like when I saw him play, he just sort of blew my mind about the potential, the musicality he put in is I think something we all sort of aspire to do.
True.
But so that's kind of my story on the new EVI. And I think Berglund Instruments, they've since come out with the new RAD. And I think he's doing great. And I think you can expect really cool things from him in the future. I think he's gonna, one of the things he told me is he likes doing this stuff, but he wants to do stuff that's fun. And so I think you'll see other really exciting products coming out of Berglund Instruments. So I hope everybody supports that company, because I think he's doing in the custom sort of area. He's really doing some really innovative things. So I'm definitely a big fan of what he does, and he's really accessible and easy to reach, and he works with his customers. So that leads us, I guess, to my latest project, which you were involved in.
Yes, let's talk about that.
We'll close. We can sort of finish up with that.
Yeah.
That was an interesting. I'll tell you how that came about. So I have this EVI group on Facebook. It's all EVI players. It's the largest. I think it's the only or largest EVI sort of only players group. But it's for EVI enthusiasts and rekeyed players too. We take anybody who's likes EVI or who's interested in EVI or an EVI enthusiast. And the guys were on there, a variety of guys like Sam Zambito and, who else? Bert Locks and Chris Case and others. Just, I can't list them all. There's so many great players, EVI players out there that I really admire and think highly of. They were talking about, James Barella as well. They were talking about the Krumar, and we were and Mark Steiner, of course, and we were just talking about how great, the sound of the Krumar was. It was my first EVI, and it was just a fun instrument. So they're all talking it up, and I'm thinking to myself, and I'm getting into soft synths and plugins, sort of switching over now. And I'm like, you know what? It'd be really cool to do take that old Krumar plug, or the old Krumar module, which was really simple. It had a super simple interface, just a really rich sound, and make it into a plugin. And I was like, well, that'd be cool. So I started thinking about that, right? Because the EVI is in good shape and in good hands, and we're in the middle of a pandemic, and I'm like, well, that'd be a fun project to take on. So I'm talking to my group, and I socialize it with the group, and they're like, yeah, that'd be great. Don Kagan in particular, another great trumpet player, great EVI player. Steve Cooper, all these guys. They're like, yeah, we'd love this. Do it. So I start thinking about it, and I end up meeting, as I'm looking for solutions. And by solutions, you can probably identify as things that work well with our instruments, right? So in the plug-in world, we're like second-class citizens to the keyboard market, right? We're kind of secondary. The wind controller thing is sort of a niche area, and everything's made with keyboard players in mind, and then they might throw in breath mapping and like CC2 or something, and and make it work, and then that's it. You're good to go. Right. So I was looking for specific solutions, and that's how I kind of came across Respiro through Rudy, and I met this guy, Davidson Carpenter, who you interviewed as well. And I start talking to him, and I said, look, I I'm looking at I see you have a plugin, and I'm like, tell me more about it. And he sort of says, listen, I'll let you check out. He's like, why don't you check out my thing? It's called Windsynth. And so I check out Windsynth, and it was he was doing some interesting stuff. But it was more than I wanted. But I think he did, like he was really generous to allow me to sort of try it out and sort of give me an evaluation license. And he was doing amazing things. I'm like, wow, you know, and he like put the kitchen sink into Windsynth, which was amazing. And it could do like, it had 8 types of synthesis or more, and it had all these different functionalities. So I keep talking to him, and we struck up a pretty good conversation. And I said, listen, these guys in my group have been talking about, you know, it'd be great if we had a plug-in, there's this analog, you know, unit from back in the like late 70s, early 80s that Nile made. It's called the Krumar. It was Krumar EVI. I was like, only EVI players had access to it. It's kind of like the Lyricon. Only Lyricon people could access the Lyricon without like other modifications or something. And he seemed interested in it. So I said, well, it's really simple. It came in this case. So I show him some pictures, and I sent some videos of like Judd Miller playing it and Mark Hatch playing it and other people playing it. And it sounds really good, by the way. Mark Steiner playing it. Mark's, I think, a big proponent of the Krumar. So I send it to him, and he's like, yeah, that's really cool. So I'm like, what do you think? I go, wouldn't it be cool if there was a plugin for that? And I go, I said, I think people would be really interested in it, especially EWI players who aren't really that familiar with it, but would love it because it has a good sound and it has that classic sort of Steiner filter sound. And so we started working together on it, and I started sending samples of it. I'd record it, take photos of the settings, and then align it with these recordings that I did of it, and started working with him. And then we sort of struck up this relationship, whereas I told him, listen, you know, I'll help you do it. I'm not going to charge you to do it. I'll do it because it's a community thing. You have the skills and the abilities to do it. And he decided to take on the project. He was looking at some other things at the time, but I kind of sidetracked him, and he started doing EVI-NER, and that's where you kind of came involved, and you had a relationship with him, and
yeah,
you know, we put together a testing team, and with a bunch of people, EVI players and EWI players were on that, including you and Eli,
right,
and some others.
Yeah.
And Mark Steiner and a bunch of people. Too many to list.
I loved it. I loved it from the first time I played it. I was also very surprised from my own personal experience how well it reacted, especially on low dynamics.
Yeah.
Because playing hard on an EWI, at least on my case, it's easier. Play soft on an EWI is much harder.
That's right.
And to be able to do it with a plugin that can also create that sound, that type of dynamics for you. For me, that was a bit of a challenge, because most of the plugins that I played or tried till that particular point, by the way, regardless of Respiro, which is kind of, for me, it's the same. The EVI-NER and Respiro, they really start from zero. They can really play soft, and you can really hear the beginning of a sound. It's not like but it has like wow, like the really a beautiful curve that starts from soft, and you can really manipulate the sound.
There's something about that, isn't there? There's something about breath response which is key to all of this.
Sure, definitely.
How you program that, and like Rudy nailed it. Totally. Rudy totally nailed it in Respiro, and I also think Davidson nailed it as well.
He did.
For what he did. He took to this sort of like a duck in water, as we say. And he just had his method, and he has a natural curiosity about synths, and he's like, in many ways, you know, like you, and he saw the Krumar as a worthwhile thing to sort of pay homage to in a plugin, because he saw these things as valuable to the sort of synth community. Yeah. And he did a great job. I
You
was
did.
like amazing. So I was lucky to play the prototypes, and I was like, wow, this feels pretty good. And I have a Krumar, and it's a great little synth. But I got to say, he added he sort of updated some things in it
Right.
and made it really interesting. So it gets close, in soft synths, you're never going to get it 100%, but it gets very close in my book to what I'm able to do on the Krumar.
Right.
And it's very convenient, and it can do more things too. Like instead of like making only 2 combinable waves, we were able to get like 4. And he came up with all these he added some things to it. And sort of our relationship was, I'm like, I sort of took this product role, and I worked with him, and I was like, we have to have a limited set of features, and because we don't want too many things at once. And part of the elegance of the Krumar was it was so simple. You just turn dials, and you got, filter dial here, and you got these great sounds. So we came up with this idea, and he implemented it with great skill. And it's been fairly successful. I think people really are liking it. It's shown to be very popular, but it was helped by people like you when you came out with that sort of harmonizer rotator video demo that caught a ton of attention. And then Eli comes out.
Yeah. Okay.
And Eli does his thing, and that articulation blows everybody's mind.
Yeah.
But your videos were really great. Really gathered a lot of interest. You made it sound good. And what I think is with these plugins is it's plugins can't make a musician sound good. It's good musicians can make a plugin sound great. And a good musician can make a good plugin sound really, really good. And then in the case of you and Eli and others that have since put out videos, it sort of shows what can be achieved with these kinds of tools, which is kind of amazing. So I was blown away by your demo, but really pleased. And, and to see how you use it in interesting ways sort of is inspiring. What I could do. It also made me interested in that program, the MIDI harmonization program.
Yeah.
Which I think is a great program.
I use it all the time. It's made by a Dutch guy, Johan.
Not Ewan?
He's a Johan.
He's the Yo? Okay.
He's the Yo. He actually lives very close by to like 20 minutes from Amsterdam, very close by in a small town next to it. And I got in touch with him back in 2013, I think, or 12, where I actually stumbled upon some videos that he posted with the harmonizer, and it was still back in the day. It was still very a much simpler version, maybe a prototype still. I'm not quite sure. And I was one of the first guys to purchase his plugin, and one thing led to another, and he helped me. Apparently, he's also very good with programming for breath controls. So he helped me with my Logic setup, and then later with some other plugins. Then I own a bunch of analog synths, and in the beginning, when my knowledge was very basic, he kind of made a lot of templates for me. So I play the Evolver from Dave Smith Instruments, and the Mofo from Dave Smith Instruments, the Prophet 6 from Dave. And he made
hard to get some of those.
Yeah, I know. But
the Evolvers are highly sought after. Swana's use of the Evolver was really interesting. It had an interesting sound too. It's hard to get now, though. It's like they're rare. Well, they're not too rare, but they're not like Krumar rare.
No. They're still running around. Actually, you can still find a couple.
But they've gone up in value. I think the demand is higher than the supply.
I guess so. But anyway, funny fact, by the way, I got the Evolver because I heard Swana when I was in Philly playing the Evolver. I was like, I want that.
After hearing Swana on it, everybody wants an Evolver.
100%. Yeah. Well,
I want an Evolver.
So anyway, Johan helped me a lot with setting up my setup, and he made this really easy, comfortable type of harmonizer app, which you can just route to any DAW or any plugin you want.
Yeah.
and it works great with the EVI-NER. So the EVI-NER is a monophonic plugin, but with a DAW, you can just do it times 4 or times 5. And then you just route every MIDI channel, every voice to a different MIDI channel, and then the EVI-NER accepts it. So if you have
that's
like
amazing.
4 or 5 EVI-NERs or 6 EVI-NERs, panned, affected, and all that kind of stuff, then you start getting like really cool sounds and cool.
Well, it's funny. Brecker was really into that, and that's, to me, that style of wind controller playing, it's like on another level. It's almost like a third dimension of. It's like, because you're dealing. Horn players normally don't play chords. That's not a native thing, but the wind controller players go to that sort of that space and time where you can do that chordal rotative stuff, and that, to me, it's a high level area and an interesting area to get into. And when I heard you do that, I was really blown away. I was blown away because you were getting an expander sound with I was like, it sounds like an Oberheim expander. And that's that plugin that I've been working on, and he's making it sound like an expander with this other tool. So you sort of demonstrated how you could one application that a user could take with this really cost-effective plugin that we made. That's another thing that David's and I, we wanted to make this really accessible. There's not a lot of really cost-effective. We wanted adoption. We wanted people to have access to these tools. So we priced it. I helped him price it, and I think we really did a good job there. It's priced for adoption. It's not priced to get as much wallet.
It's a very how should I say it? Like, I was even surprised that it was priced like that.
Well, we talked about it. I looked at the market. So I'm a product manager. I did software product development, not in the music space, but in other spaces. So I'm good at things like looking at market data and looking at what the competition's doing. So if you look, you see people pricing them based on the level of problems that they solve. And if you look out there, there's quite a bit of analog modeling plugins out there. So, and if I looked at the sort of the mean price, and it was around $30 for that, for big developers like Cherry Audio and others. So usually, it'll say $250, and then all of a sudden it'll go down. It'll be on sale for $30, which kind of tells you that the pricing schemes are ridiculous in the plugin industry, right? So if you're going to sell it for $30, no one's going to buy it, right, for $250. The list, that's almost ridiculous. Yeah. But people price them the way they are, and if you look at audio modeling, what they charge, and other Respiro and others, they're priced because of the level of the problem that they solve, and that's fair pricing. But we thought for this, I think the idea with Davidson is this is going to be the start, and there's going to be a series of, this is the beginning with him. So he's really engaged, and I can't say too much. I'm going to continue to assist him because it's good for the community, and honestly, I'm available because there's not much going on with the pandemic. It's not like there's a ton of gigs, right?
No, definitely not. It's
been over a year, I think, since there's been a good, a gig. I think the last gig I played was a wedding, a year ago, over a year ago, or almost a year ago. So I think it's really cool, and I'm getting interested in. I've learned so much working on these things about synthesis, and we priced it that way just because he's a small company. He's a really innovative maker, but we wanted adoption. So we wanted this to be an entry-level product with value, but we wanted a lot of people to have access to it because that's how you can grow your customer base. And this is a good way to do it. And then as you build, we'll build, in theory, he'll build on that with other releases and bundles. And he's, as he adapts and he shifts and he makes more of this stuff, you're going to see some really interesting things coming out of Davidson, multimedia. He's really doing some cool stuff. But his special sauce is that breath. He's really got the breath dynamics down. he understands things at a really deep level, way beyond me. And I was just really, I had a really good time working with him and sort of lighting that fire to get him to do it. And also just the idea of, having access to this sort of plug-in that would be fun for everybody to play. So, we'll see what happens from there. Like I said, I'm very community oriented. I will work with anybody. If they want to develop a new EVI, if they want to develop something good for the wind controller community, I'm there to help anybody and do it as part of a community effort. Just because I like this field, I like the people in this field, and there's just some tremendously talented musicians and other players in this space, which you've shown through your series of interviews, which, by the way, I think is really educational. That you're doing this, because, and as I said earlier, I'm probably the least worthy to be on this list of the people that you've interviewed, but
I do not think so.
I think it's amazing to hear the history of who's involved and the serious players and how our instruments came to be and where our instruments are going, and to hear people talk about it and think about it. It sort of brings the community together. And so that's what I've really liked about your series. So when you asked me to do it, I was really honored that you wanted to speak with me about it. But I'm more of a sort of a behind the scenes catalytic player. I'm more of a guy that sort of finds or runs into, by maybe I'm lucky, but I run into people who are extremely talented, who are committed and believe in what they do, and then somehow or another it works out.
Well, that's something of great value. I think that, behind the scene is as much as important as the scene itself, otherwise, how would have we got a Berglund instrument, and how would have we got a NuEVI? So that's all. Well, that's part of your contribution, and I think this is really worth to mention and to show.
We can't survive on just playing the instruments alone. It's not enough. So you have to realize you have to take action. And that's what I learned with the EVI, is that it was really at risk of dying out if we didn't do something. But while I think I did a good job sort of raising the alarm, there was a lot of people involved, which I told you about: James, Ewan, Mark, Niall, other people, a lot of other people involved. But I think there's good things to come. We'll see what's going on. Like I said, keep doing what you're doing. Keep putting out your videos. It's, that's something I got to get into. Like I said, I'm more into live playing. I'm really more into playing in front of people. But I see all you guys with this pandemic. I've seen the use of with videos and things like that. It's very powerful.
Thank you. Doing.
Yeah, I should get more into that, but I'm so busy working behind the scenes, trying to get things, done I don't think I could do it as good as you guys do. And I'm always blown away when you and Eli and others, and like even Eddie, you EVI players, by the way, are really amazing with what you do, with some of the things you guys are doing, along with the EVI players. But I look at Eddie and all these people doing stuff and record and what I'm hearing out there. And I'm consistently amazed, and it's humbling to hear how much dedication and work you guys put into it. So it's inspiring. So we didn't have that back in the early days, and so we have it now, and I think it makes us all better players.
I totally agree. There's not much I can say about that. I totally agree.
But I'm glad you're enjoying EVI-NER, man. Keep.
Yeah,
I think you're gonna like the next thing. By the way,
I can't wait. And
I think you're going to be real.
I'll be there. I'll be there when it's out. I'll definitely.
It'll be interesting to hear what you have to say, because actually we should talk offline at some point about that. But
sure.
I would like to get your thoughts as well.
I would love to.
And as it goes into that next phase, but I think there's an interesting thing coming up.
Great.
After what happens after EVI-NER is going to be really interesting.
Awesome. Great.
Cool, man.
Steve, thank you so much.
My pleasure.